The passage that we heard from the mother in the recording is the one we read a couple of days ago. It's on page 533, the beginning of a very, very significant phase in Canto 6, almost the end of page 533. Once as she sat in deep felicitous muse, still quivering from her lover's strong embrace, and made her joy a bridge twixt earth and heaven, an abyss yawned suddenly beneath her heart. A vast and nameless fear dragged at her nerves, as drags a wild beast in its half-slaughtered prey. It seemed to have no den from which it sprang. It was not hers, but hid its unseen cause. Then rushing came its vast and fearful fount. We talked about it 2 days ago. I just thought could refer you to the passage in the text. Well, after all these days, this is the day when Satyavan will die. As you know, this has been used almost like a mantric line. This was the day when Satyavan must die. Again and again it comes. And the death of Satyavan seems to be the climactic event in the whole of this story, because unless he dies, the subsequent action, the subsequent work that Savitri has been born to do will not start. And if you want to understand how pregnant this whole line is, instead of my talking about it to you, there is a little book written by our friend Dr. R.Y. Deshpande. The title of it is Satyavan Must Die. It is well worth your attention. Maybe it's available in Shabda. If it is not available in Shabda, I know the man who published it. He's sitting right here. Hello, sir. Satyavan Must Die. You have the book? Okay. You stand up so that they can all see you.
It is also available in Shabda.
Shabda. Okay. It's also available in Shabda. Vak. It's also available in Vak. Okay, now we have seen that this canto we started yesterday to read, was written by Sri Aurobindo in 1916. And out of the 177 lines that this canto now consists of, 133 are still the same as they were in October 1916. So this received very little revision. And I also read out to you when Nirodha asked him when he asked him what is now left, he said the book of death and the epilogue. He said we'll say about that later. So what reasons he had, etc., we won't go into it, we won't speculate about it. Yesterday I tried to explain why in my very, very simple-minded way, not a literary way, but a very simple-minded, common-sense way, it is appropriate that this canto is called Canto 3. Actually, why it's called Canto 3 was this part was Canto 3 of the original Savitri written in 1916, which was only 1090 lines, 1700 lines. At that time, this was Canto 3. So to remind readers that this has not received further embellishment or change or revision at Sri Aurobindo's hands, the editors must have thought it proper to call it Canto 3. So if you suddenly wake up, why is it called Canto 3? Then there is a footnote explaining why this is called Canto 3, etc. But as you know, he seems to have written in those days about 150 lines of poetry each day, because what is now Canto Book 8 and Book 9 and Book 10, he wrote all these in 3 days, 16, 17, and 18. And it must have been a real outburst of inspiration. But subsequently he came back to Book 9, he came back to Book 10, and Book 10 particularly, the last canto of Book 10, Canto 4, was expanded 18 times. It's now 18 times as long as it was in 1916, but for some reason, we won't speculate because it's a waste of time. This canto has remained more or less the same, but except for one or two places where you can see that it doesn't dovetail with the rest. Uh, Otherwise, there is no indication to suggest that this is an earlier version in style, etc. It doesn't betray its earlier, that it was written, for example, 34 years before some of the other passages were written. By this time, Sri Aurobindo's epic style had more or less been set, more or less been formed. The general tone, the felicitous language that sublime poetry requires. Sublimity in poetry is a very, very rare thing, and we are not used to seeing sublime in poetry. So when you see sublime in poetry, for most modern readers, it is something they can't even bear, they can't even imagine somebody could write sublime poetry. Sublimity, they all think, is associated with the Greek times and Latin times and ancient times. Modern days are not for sublimity, etc. But this is the kind of style, this is the kind of uplifted kind of language that he developed for this particular epic. He had other kinds of styles, as you know, his narratives like Baji Prabhu and so on. There the style is of a different kind. It's a kind of historical narrative. Okay. Now we are on page 564, I think. Satyavan and Savitri have come out that morning. Savitri, for the first time, has sought the permission of Satyavan's parents to accompany Satyavan to the forest, and she has given a reason why she wants to do it. She simply says, I have heard a lot about this forest. I have heard a lot about Satyavan's companions in the forest, these companions being the trees, the lake, the birds, the deer, etc., etc. And he is ecstatic when he talks about them, but I haven't met them. So I would like to go and see who these people are, who these places are. So she comes out, and Satyavan is very excited for the first time. He is taking Savitri on a tour of the places where he grew up. And he has shown a part of that forest. According to our friend Deshpandeji, this is Jeshta Amavasya. In Jesht, in some parts of India, it's already rainy season. In Kerala, it is rainy season. In our Konkan, it is rainy season. But where Satyavan and Savitri were roaming around, probably the rains had not started. So as you can see, it is the peak of summer, and Amavasya, peak of summer. On that day, they were wandering around in the open sun. And Satyavan, if were all alone, would have been a little careful on other days. But by Savitri by his side, he was so excited. He was going on talking. And suddenly he realized that he has to collect some firewood. So asks Savitri to wait there, and he goes up a tree, and with an axe, he is trying to chop off the branch of a tree as Savitri is watching him. But as Sri Aurobindo tells us all the time, Savitri is not listening to anything that Satyavan is saying. Savitri is only listening to his voice, the cadence of his voice, because she knows any moment now death is going to strike him, and probably the sentence that is now coming out of his mouth, for all you know, may be the very last sentence. So with that kind of an attitude, she is receiving everything he is giving, and he doesn't know anything. He is totally innocent of this fact that this was the day on which he is to die. So he merrily sings a chant, a song, and he is swinging his axe lustily and so on. This is going on. And this is where we were. This is where I left you yesterday. But as he worked, his doom upon him came. The violent and hungry hounds of pain traveled through his body, biting as they passed. The violent and hungry hounds of pain. Pain chased every part of his body, through every part of his body, traveled through his body, biting as they passed. Silently, and all his suffering breath besieged, strove to rend life's strong heart cords and be free. So he's trying his very best to bear the pain, to suppress the pain, to a kind of triumph over the pain. All this he's trying to do, because all of a sudden His entire body is racked with pain. He doesn't know this. He thinks it's a kind of passing phenomenon. He's kind of trying to ignore it. He's trying to suppress it. It will go away. That's what he's hoping. Then helped as if a beast had left its prey. There was a slight moment of relief. This pain suddenly stopped for a little while. Then helped as if a beast had left its prey, a moment in a wave of rich relief. Suddenly, the pain seems to have subsided and he feels the experience of rich relief. Reborn to strength and happy ease, he stood. Suddenly he felt as if he were born again to his original strength and sense of well-being in the body. He stood rejoicing and resumed his confident toil, but with less seeing strokes. But this time, his strokes were not as exact, as precise, as firm as they used to be, because this first onrush of pain had already done something to him. Now the great woodsman hewed at him. The woodsman that hews at everybody, death. The great woodsman now started hewing at him, started working on him, and his labor ceased. And Satyavan felt all the strength in his body oozing out. He couldn't lift his hand, he couldn't use any strength. Lifting his arm, he flung away the poignant axe far from him like an instrument of pain. So he just threw away the axe which he was using, which he was wielding. She came to him in silent anguish and clasped. Every bit of this was being noticed by Savitri. She knew a change was coming over him. He knew suddenly he had stopped for a while. He knew he was once again trying to continue with what he was doing, but he couldn't. So Savitri rushed to him, and as he came down, clasped, and he cried to her, Savitri, a pang cleaves through my head and breast as if the axe were piercing it and not the living branch. Savitri, there is a pain in my body as if all the strokes of the axe that I had given to this tree did not fall on the tree, but they fell on me. As if all these strokes, had damaged something within myself. So that's what he says. A pang cleaves through my head and breast as if the axe were piercing it and not the living branch. Such agony rends me as the tree must feel when it is sundered and must lose its life. Now I know what the tree must have felt when I was using the axe on it. Similarly, the great hunter, the great woodsman, is using his axe on my body and I feel this intense pain. A while let me lay my head upon thy lap and guard me with thy hands from evil fate. Perhaps because thou touchest, death may pass. Let me lie down, he says, with my head upon thy lap, and guard me with thy hands from evil fate. If there is an evil fate lurking somewhere around, your hands will be protection enough from this evil fate, so that he says, perhaps because thou touchest, because you are touching me, death may pass. Well, then Savitri sat under branches wide, cool, green against the sun, not the hurt tree. Savitri was careful not to rest underneath the tree which Satyavan had gone up on, and of it, one of the branches he was trying to chop off. She avoided the tree because, instinctively she felt the tree could not have entertained very many friendly feelings towards Satyavan, who was just trying to chop it off. She just avoided that tree. There are other trees. So she sat underneath at the other tree, which was a kingly trunk, big tree. So then Savitri sat under branches wide, cool, green against the sun, not the hurt tree. The tree that he was trying to cut branches off, that she avoided. With his keen axe had cloven the tree, which his keen axe had cut. She avoided that, she shunned. That tree she avoided. But leaned beneath a fortunate kingly trunk. She guarded him in her bosom and strove to soothe his anguished brow and body with her hands. So she slowly moved her hand on his face, on his eyebrows, on his eyes, etc., his anguished brow and body with her hands. All grief and fear were dead within her now, and a great calm had fallen. Savitri had been preparing for this moment for a whole year. And all that we saw, all the yoga we read about in book 7, which consists of 7 cantos, all that going within, all that going beyond the mind, receiving the new potency, the new dynamism of the supramental, all this Savitri has now imbibed. So death is the last thing she would fear. So it's not fear. Most people would be paralyzed in a situation like this. But Savitri is not paralyzed. She has no fear at that point, no grief either. All grief and fear were dead within her now. And a great calm had fallen. The wish to lessen his suffering, all that concerns right now is his suffering must be minimized to the extent I can. A wish to lessen his suffering, the impulse that opposes pain, were the one mortal feeling left. The only human feeling she had left that time is somehow I must give some relief to this man as she knows what is happening, as he is dying. Let me make it as painless as I can. It passed, griefless and strong, she waited like the gods. Griefless and strong, she waited like the gods. And she's waiting what is happening next. What is the next that's going to happen? Because as our Deshpande ji has pointed out, it is the sunstroke that ultimately, the medical reason probably for this situation, the sunstroke, and I gave you the other day the reason enough why it could be the sunstroke, because Jeshta Amavasya is a very hot day, and Satyavan getting excited and talking more than was good for him, etc., because ultimately God always leaves a medical reason for every death. So we feel satisfied, doctors feel satisfied, oh, this is the reason. It doesn't say anything at all. Why should this disease hit this man? We don't know. But everybody seems to be reasonably satisfied. Oh, this is there, oh, that's heart failure, this is kidney failure, this is this, this is this. So he doesn't just he doesn't want to leave a mystery behind, that he gives a reason for it. So in this case, probably it was the sunstroke, and I don't know whether in sunstroke there was an instant remedy and they couldn't think of, we don't know any of these things. Okay. But this is all you will find in that book, Satyavan Must Die. What could be the reason for Satyavan's sudden collapse? But now his sweet, familiar hue was changed into a tarnished grayness, and his eyes dimmed over, forsaken of the clear light she loved. All the brightness on his face, the color, everything now began to pale. Everything became hue. When the face changed its color into a tarnished grayness. Not just a grayness, but a tarnished, burned kind of grayness, tarnished grayness. And the telltale sign, his eyes, which always had such brightness, looked very dull. Forsaken of the clear light she loved. Only the dull and physical mind was left, vacant of the bright spirit's luminous gaze. There was just enough of the physical mind. All the other levels of the mind had already stopped working. Only the physical mind was alive, which kind of takes care of the body. Everything else had stopped working. But once before it faded wholly back, he cried out in a clinging last despair, Savitri, Savitri, oh Savitri, lean down my soul and kiss me while I die. And he also realizes probably these are the last moments of his life, and this is what he says to Savitri. Savitri, Savitri, oh Savitri, lean down my soul and kiss me while I die. And even as her pallid lips pressed his failed. Before she could press her lips on his lips had almost lost all response. His failed, losing last sweetness of response. His cheek pressed down her golden arm. The details that Sri Aurobindo gives you looks like static details, but you actually see Satyavan's face turning left. It's like this, and Savitri lowers her mouth to kiss at him in his lips, but the lips aren't there anymore because the mouth, he's already dead, and so the head has slid on this side. So, and this side is the arm. So that's what he's describing. So it is kind of static description capturing a motion, the motion that actually must have taken place at that time. He describes it. His cheek pressed down her golden arm. She sought his mouth still with her living mouth, as if she could persuade his soul back with her kiss, as if soul could be put back through her kiss, as sometimes first aid is given to people whose heart begins to falter. That kind of thing, she thought probably that could be done. Then grew aware they were no more alone. Then suddenly she became aware of a presence. There were not just the two of them. There was another being, another third being, third person. Something had come there, conscious, vast, and dire. Something had come there, conscious, vast, and dire. This is the first introduction to the physical presence of the god of death. It's an announcement, as it were, and see how the announcement is made. He says, something had come there, conscious, vast, and dire. Near her she felt a silent shade immense, chilling the noon with darkness for its back. Near her, she has not yet seen him. Savitri has not yet seen the god of death, but she is now only becoming aware of his presence. And in the process of being aware of its presence, she suddenly realizes the noon had lost its brightness, the noon had become chill. In other words, nature around itself was paralyzed. The god of death had come, that kind of a presence, god of death, that's the presence he is describing indirectly. Something had come there, conscious, vast, and dire. Near her she felt a silent shade immense, chilling the noon with darkness for its back. In the old version, he almost stopped here. There are two more lines. The last lines which concludes this canto were still there in the old version. The next few lines I am now going to read out to you were added subsequently. These are the only few lines. I told you he had only about 33 new lines added. The rest of them are as they were. An awful hush had fallen upon the place. There was such a hush. Not only had the noon become chill, there was no cry of birds, no voice of beasts. Even the birds were paralyzed. They had forgotten their usual cry. Beasts had all frozen where they were. They were not jumping around, galloping around, they were just there. An awful hush had fallen upon the place. There was no cry of birds, no voice of beasts. Now, the point is, in the whole of Savitri, as you can see, this little canto, Sri Aurobindo must have written in one afternoon, just like that. And those of you who have been reading it, probably and reading or because you have to come to the end of Savitri, right? So nobody reads the book patiently. It doesn't take the time. They just read. Oh, I want to, how many pages more left, like that? All the time we do this. So, one of the aids to reading Savitri with your full heart is to know the entire terrain more or less intellectually. And then each day open at random and read those 3-4 lines. And wherever you open, you are bound to strike very rich ore. So your day is done. You don't have to read anything else. But if you say, now I'm starting on page 1, I have to go to page 724, so today's 5 pages I must read. If you do that, then what happens is this becomes like people writing Ramanam, I must write 25 lakhs Ramanam. When the time I write the 25th lakh, last zero is put, Rama has to be present before me. Rama doesn't even know that you are writing it. All these mechanical things can do this. What is important is the entire engagement of your inner being with it. Whether you read it daily or you read it occasionally, whatever, when you read it with all your being, with all your heart. Now, to be able to do that, what is necessary is an intellectual understanding. What is book 2? What is book 3? What is canto such and such? Where are we? What is the terrain? Are we on the bank of a river, or is it the ocean or the sea? Where are we? Or is it only a well that I am looking in front of me? At least this kind of a discrimination one has to have. And all the things that we are doing here is supposed to help you in this, getting this kind of a map of Savitri. This is not in any way of taking Savitri to you. You have to go to her. Nobody else can take Savitri to you. And therefore, I've asked myself, there is a general feeling in some quarters that one shouldn't be talking about Savitri in any great detail. One should really, the same thing can be taken to the other extreme. One shouldn't even open it. It should be tied with a silken cloth and put in the puja room, and you put flowers on it, etc., etc. That's a totally ritualistic approach. All that it means, all that one should be careful that with your mind you cannot understand something which has been conceived at a level far beyond the mind. And so you should be able to open up gradually and not read it like any other book. That's the meaning of all this. Don't try to limit Savitri with what your mind can read in it. Open your mind so your mind can rise with Savitri. That's the idea. And so, for that to happen, my own assumption is one must have some understanding of where we are, unless, of course, you are some of the gifted few. I have known people, very gifted people, who just came here with their wives. Sometimes some people are very lucky, they marry these wives, and they brought them here. Come here, we have to go to Pondicherry. And then went to stroll to Shabda bookstore and looked around, and there's this Savitri. Oh, English, poetry. I have never read poetry in my life, so put it away like that. But the wife buys it. For some reason, mysterious reason, she buys it. So you go to back after 4 whatever holidays, you go back, and then one day what happens is you are posted at a place where there is very little work. Government offices generally are of that kind. And so when you go, you decided, "Oh, today I don't have much work. Why don't I take this book? My wife was raving about. Let me see what it is." So it takes it. And it begins to read it in the office because there is nothing else happening on that day. And suddenly is amazed that he can understand it. He said, "For the first time in my life, I was a hater of poetry. I started. And lo and behold, this man started going to office every day with Savitri. Within 6 months, he has put in his papers for resignation. And at the end of the year, he is here asking Pradeep bhai, what can I do for you? Is there anything, any work for me? I am a trained engineer. Why have you come here? I have come here to read Savitri." See, this is the kind of miracle that can happen to people. I don't deny any of these things. But these are very, very rare, lucky people. All of us are not that lucky. And therefore, for such people, what I am trying to say is, just because you are a devotee, one should not have an anti-intellectual kind of trance. That is not warranted. That's not necessary. Both can go together. The intellect should realize that it's only a tool and it can only help. But ultimately, it is the opening that has to come. The opening will come through Savitri, because there is a presence there, there is a spirit there, there is a consciousness there. I told you once I was giving a talk, series of talks in Madras, and a gentleman who has spent all his life doing Sri Vidya, he was Sri Vidya Upasak. He was, I won't name him, he was the president. So in one of the introductory talks, I said, Savitri is a great golden bridge, and this will lead you to Sri Aurobindo's own consciousness, etc., etc. At the end of his talk, at the end of my talk, the presidential remarks, he said, I agree with most of the things our learned speaker, that is me, said. But there is one thing with which I don't agree, that this is not a bridge to Sri Aurobindo's consciousness. This is Sri Aurobindo's consciousness itself. This is Sri Aurobindo's consciousness verbally embodied. It's a verbal manifestation of his consciousness. That's the correction I would like to make. He said that from that day, I always remember to mention this, because he, being a Shaktupasak, he knows what Shakti is, then what consciousness is, and so on. So it is that kind. What I am trying to say, why I take you away from what we are doing, is that even in this small canto, it is not wrong if you have a literary background to look for it, for the literary delights that Sri Aurobindo has packed it with. If you don't have it, doesn't matter. Whatever your interest, you cultivate those through Savitri and see how much, even casually, he is a casually written kind of canto. This is not a canto on which he labored. There are other cantos for which, he has really wait for inspiration to come, and the lines he corrected because his inspiration said the earlier line was not adequate, new lines were added, etc. This is almost a casual thing that he was writing, and yet look at the richness of it, and look at the great art with which some of these things are built. Like Yama comes, how does he come? What kind of impression Savitri get out of him? How is he introduced? How is his physical presence introduced? These are little small things. And one must be able to enjoy these things along with the rhythm, the diction, the vision, etc., etc. It's only through this aesthetic body, you can develop a kind of an appreciation. Oh, I read it, I don't enjoy it, but mother said you must read it every day, so I'm reading it. That should not be the attitude. What I am saying is, if you stretch a little more, there is honey dripping each line. And we must try to get at that point. And so, let us go back from what I am saying now, go back to the text. An awful hush had fallen upon the place. There was no cry of birds, no voice of beasts. A terror and an anguish filled the world. A terror and an anguish. Death does two things. It once terrorizes us, completely frozen, and anguish. That death takes away someone forever. There is no reprieve. We'll talk about it. There have been cases uh, as if annihilation's mystery had taken a sensible form. Annihilation's mystery, the mystery of death, annihilation, destruction, had suddenly appeared in a physical form. That was the god of death. How did he look? He looked as if all that you and I think of when we think of death had suddenly taken a visible form. That's what god of death is. And as if annihilation's mystery had taken a sensible form, a cosmic mind looked out on all from formidable eyes, contemning all with its unbearable gaze, and with immortal lids and a vast brow, it saw in its immense destroying thought all things and beings as pitiful dream, rejecting with calm disdain nature's delight, the wordless meaning of its deep regard, voicing the unreality of things, and life that would be forever but never was, and its brief and vain recurrence without cease, as if from a silence without form or name, the shadow of a remote, uncaring God, doomed to his not the illusory universe, cancelling its show of idea and act in time, and its imitation of eternity. In this is a passage Sri Aurobindo subsequently added. Among the passages that he added was this one was one passage, where he not only describes death, but also very briefly, summarily tells us what death stands for. I told you one of the study we need to make is what does death stand for in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri. Uh, because as I said, I will have more to say about this. Some of these notions associated with death you have in the Puranas, you have in the Upanishads, you have in the Vedas, and in the Vedas, as I told you the other day, he is almost the name of the Supreme Lord. One of the names of the Supreme Lord is Yama. Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. This very famous statement made very famous by our politicians. In that, it occurs in that one of the names by which the Supreme is known is Yama. That name comes there. So the Yama is not just a god of death, a hideous, terrible character. He is the giver of immortality. We'll say a little more about it. And Vyasa himself, thanks to the notes of our friend Dr. Deshpande, describes Yama in these lines. See how powerful these lines are, the Sanskrit. Muhurtat eva chapashyat purusham raktavasasam. He comes, Lord of Death is coming, and how does he describe him? Muhurtateva chapashyat purusham raktavasavam baddhamaulim vapushmantam aditya samatejasam. How bright was he? Aditya samatejasam. Shamavadatam raktaksham pashahastam bhayavaham sthitam satyavatah parshe nirikshantam cha tameva cha. Probably you don't understand its meaning. I don't either. At least I didn't in the beginning. So what it means is this is not very difficult. If you really look at it, Sanskrit is the easiest language, most misunderstood. That's why the mother said we must all learn Sanskrit, right? It's a very easy language because all these words are in our languages too. Except that the sandhi, etc., makes each word look so big and difficult. But if you can analyze the sandhis and take out each word, it's very easy. Muhurta tevat, within a short time, Savitri, cha apashyat, she saw. Apashyat is to saw. What did she see? Present, purusham, a bright person, Raktavasasam, in red attire. Somebody she saw immediately who was in a red attire, with a baddhamaulim, with a tiara on his head. How was he? Vapushmantam. Vapushmantam, handsome. God of death is described as a very handsome person, Vapushmantam. In fact, Sri Aurobindo makes him handsome later. We will see what happens to the god of death. One of the great things about Savitri is the god of death discovering himself, something the god of death never knew about himself. Sri Aurobindo shows him what he is. He is this. He is also handsome, Vapushmantam, Aditya Samatejasam. He is looked like the sun, brilliant like the sun. His body dark in hue. All our major heroes, in spite of our fascination for white complexion, Indians are very well known for it throughout the world. Right? As soon as a boy or a girl is brought, the first thing we ask is what is the... Yeah. All our Krishna was not, Rama was not, right? Vishnu was not. Why should our sons be? I don't know. So here also, the god of death, he says, Shama Avadatma. He was dark in color. His body was dark, but lustrous. All that you need is good health, well-built body, etc., rather than fair. Right? So he says, lustrous, but raktaksham. His eyes were blood red eyes. Pashahastam. He had a noose in his hand. Pashahastam bhayavaham. So he struck terror into people's hearts. Fear, bhayavaham. Sthitam satyavatah parshve. Where did Savitri see him? She saw him standing by the side of Satyavan. Where Satyavan was lying down by his side, she saw this god of death. Nirikshantam cha tamevacha. What was he doing? He was with one pointed gaze looking at Satyavan. Now this is the description that Vyasa has given. So beautiful description. And once again, as you know, Vyasa has written the whole of this story, narrated the whole story. The main part of the story with which you are concerned may be about 300-400 lines. So he doesn't have much space to describe Yama in great detail, but in this small verse, he has done a very, very good job. So let us see how Sri Aurobindo described. We have seen part of it. A terror and an anguish filled the world, as if annihilation's mystery had taken a sensible form. A cosmic mind looked out on all from formidable eyes. Contempt is not a very commonly used word, which simply means view with contempt. Contemning is to viewing, regard, looking at everything with contempt. Contemning all with its unbearable gaze. He has a kind of haughty dismissal of everything. Oh, what is this? Human being, creation, all this. This show should not be allowed to go on. I am going to crush this one of these days and finish this off. This contemning, that kind of a utter disregard, he had in his very eyes looking at the whole thing. You have already seen the god of death once in another form. Remember when we were reading Canto 6, Book 7, after Savitri had come down from experiencing all those things, the supramental vision, etc., suddenly, this is a passage which Mother read in what we heard this morning. Suddenly, there was a gap, there was an abyss that yawned almost underneath her heart, and the inconscient said, how dare Savitri, you enjoy this bliss and this, your personality, etc. In my world, I won't allow you to do this. You can't do this. This is my world. I allowed this world to grow, and I have the right to wipe it out. This is my world. We have seen this. This is an aspect of death. This is also because death is at the almost rock bottom of the inconscient. Death is that consciousness, that awareness, that spirit, which is totally intolerant against this creation. And is one, is this creation should cease and everything should go back into the inconscient. All this comes out in various forms. All the cynicism, all the evil, etc. These are all various manifestations of death. We'll see that how Sri Aurobindo describes or discusses, develops this whole notion of death. It's very, very unusual. And with the immortal lids, he has an unbearable gaze, and with immortal lids and a vast brow, it saw in its immense destroying thought all things and beings as a pitiful dream. It doesn't matter if he thought it was just a dream. Is it a pitiful dream? Such an insignificant, pitiful dream. Rejecting with calm disdain nature's delight. Whatever little things in which nature takes delight, he just can't tolerate it. That's why, if you have something good happening to you, don't celebrate it too loudly. The mother always used to caution people, don't start voicing the unreality of things. When he looks at it, he feels from his very look that, oh, all this is unreal, this is not true. And life that would be forever but never was, and its brief and vain recurrence without cease. Ultimately, what is it? The people are born, they die, again they're born, again they die. This is a transient, transitional drama going on, but why people take it so seriously, I don't understand. So, death has a total contempt for all this. As if from a silence without form or name, the shadow of a remote, uncaring God, doomed to his not the illusory universe, cancelling its show of idea and act in time and its imitation of eternity. See, we are all imitating as if we are here going to be forever and ever and ever. It is true, isn't it? One of the questions that Yudhishthir had to answer is, what is the most surprising thing about this world? Yaksha Prashna, remember? About when you talk about Mahabharata to the Indian audience, thanks to the TV serial, I don't have to give the detail now. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Only 10 years ago, Yudhishthir, which Yudhishthir, sir? People had this problem with Yudhishthir. Now they know exactly which Yudhishthir, whether he's the eldest brother, second brother, third brother, everybody knows. Well, one of the things, what is the most surprising thing about this world? Yudhishthir says the most surprising thing is, although we see death all around us, and although we know everybody who is born is bound to die, we somehow secretly hope that we might be an exception. And most of the time we behave such. And so people have poo-pooed it. The only one person who said, don't suppress this idea, keep it alive, it is significant, is Sri Aurobindo. And the mother, they simply will come to that. They simply said that death is a bad habit, we must get rid of it. It may be difficult. If you have been a smoker for 40 years, you know how difficult quitting smoking is. It's difficult. We have cultivated, later on you will see, scientific evidence which says death arrived rather late in the evolutionary journey, and death came accidentally, and because death had to come for a certain purpose, it will be there until that purpose has to be served. Once that is not necessary, death will disappear. I don't know whether Sri Aurobindo and his mother had read this scientific evidence. I don't think this evidence at that time was available. Now more and more scientists are believing that the nature of our cells of the body is not death but eternity. Death is a mistake. And so all this, there is a whole new world of death, life in death, that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have opened up, and we'll talk about it as we go along. But for the present, I know it's tea time or juice time or whatever time, she knew that visible death was standing there and Satyavan had passed from her embrace. These two lines come from the 1916 edition. Okay, we'll come back at the god of death. We just met in book 8 will continue to be with us until the end of book 11. 3-4 books. And as I pointed out, death is an important character. Yama is a very important character in this entire story. And as I told you, Savitri in fact takes Yama through a systematic process where he understands himself and he realizes who he really is, and then thus undergoes a transformation that will come to in book 11. But since Yama is such a complex character, particularly the way Sri Aurobindo has developed him, and since we have all kinds of folkloristic notions about the god of death, that he rides a buffalo, that he looks very crude, etc., etc., I would like you, the other day I mentioned a little bit of how he is presented in the Vedas, in the Rig Veda. He is also presented in the various Upanishads. And I would like to read out a little bit what Sri Aurobindo has said about the figure of Yama in the Vedas, particularly in the Upanishads. He says, in the inner sense of the Veda, Surya, the sun god, represents the divine illumination which exceeds mind and forms the pure self-luminous truth of things. He represents the self-luminous truth of things which exceeds the mind. His principal power is self-revelatory knowledge. His realm is described as the truth, the law, the vast. He is the fosterer or increaser. In the Ishopanishad, Hiranmayena Patrena Satyasyapi Hitam Mukham Tattvam Pushan Apavranu. He is being invoked to remove this golden lid. So he is the fosterer, increaser, for he enlarges and opens man's dark and limited being into a luminous and infinite consciousness. He is the soul seer, seer of oneness and knower of the self, and leads man to the highest spirit. He is Yama, controller or ordainer, for he governs man's action and manifested being by the direct law of the truth, Satya Dharma, and therefore by the right principle of our nature, a luminous power proceeding from the Father of all existence, as he reveals in himself the divine Purusha, of whom all beings are manifestations. So in one sense, the Yama that ultimately we will see is the Supreme Lord himself, an aspect of the Supreme Lord himself. So he is not just a god who comes on a buffalo. It's a much more profounder way of looking at Yama, and that's what the Vedas talk about. And also in the Kathopanishad, Nachiketa, when he goes to him, and asks for the supreme truth about death, Yama says, why do you want to know this? Gods have tired of this question. They have not been able to understand the answer to this question. You should ask some other question. Before he tries to dissuade him by offering various kinds of enticements, I will give you worldly kingdom, I'll give you this, that, and the other. Don't ask this question, because not many people understand. Even if I mention this, not many people understand what I'm saying. Then Nachiketa says, when I come to you, the most valuable thing I can get from you, other things I can get from other people. Horses and coaches and land and power and money, etc., I can get from other people. But there is something of which you are the custodian, and that I can get only from you. So since I have reached here, the wise man's way would be to ask of you what you alone can give, nobody else can give. So I'm asking you this. So there is also this assumption that Yama is the custodian of immortality, and Nachiketa therefore goes to him to find out the secret of immortality. It is in the later ideas, Yama is the god of death and has his own special word. But in the Rig Veda, he seems to have been originally a form of the sun. He is the guardian of the dharma, the law of truth, Satya Dharma, as I mentioned, which is a condition of immortality, and therefore himself the guardian of immortality. Now, those of you who have read, very few people read the Vedas in Sanskrit. They read about the Vedas from Indian Pandits who got their doctorate in Cambridge and Oxford, or what these Western scholars have written, and their writings are a very rich source of confusion and misunderstanding. Because there is a very famous, I mention this because there is a famous dialogue between Yama and Yami. And this is a very famous, the Yama is also one of the meanings of Yama is a couple or a twins. That's what Yama really means. Yama is supposed to have a sister, and she is Yami. Now, in the language of the Vedas, Vedas have a symbolic way of saying things. The Vedas do not use the rationative, rational way the mind knows. Always uses a kind of symbolic way of presenting things. There is a dialogue between Yama and Yami. These are brother and sister. Yama and Yami are brother and sisters. They are all, Yama is the son born to Vivaswan and his wife called Sharanyu Devi. The so-called Ashwini brothers are also born of the same father but another mother. That's a different story. But what is most interesting is later on in Vedas, you will find a conversation between Yama and Yami, brother and sister. And the purport of that conversation, you will be quite amazed, is that Yami desires sexual union with her brother. Now, our Pandits in Western universities or in our universities regard the Vedas as a textbook for your anthropology. So by looking at the Vedas, by looking at the language of the Vedas, they decide what ancient Vedic culture was. So they came to the conclusion, by looking at this conversation between Yami and Yama, that in ancient India, it was quite common for brother and sister to get married. This is not, I'm not concocting anything from my head. And then they know the story of Adam and Eve. They concluded the Yama and Yami must be Adam and Eve. And therefore the entire mankind is born in sin. Because that's what the Bible says. You see, this is the product of sin. And this is something that they have said and our Pandits quote, and then this is being taught in our universities. But they do not realize, this is something Sri Aurobindo has emphasized again and again, that Vedas are not a source book for anthropology. Vedas use language in a slight different way. Now, what really this really means is Yama and Yami, brother and sister, represent dharma and adharma. Because we always are aware of the fact that adharma is also a part of this world. Just as dharma is a part of this world, adharma is also a part of this world. And there is always a conflict between dharma and adharma. Dharma wants to convert adharma to his path, where adharma wants dharma to be converted to his path. And ultimately, this is an attempt where adharma wants to seduce dharma and follow her path or his path. So Yami is feminine. So this is the dialogue between, this is going on, this has gone on in Mahabharata, this is going on even in today's politics. This is going on. There are two sides, the path of the righteous and the unrighteous. And the righteous and the unrighteous are there always conflicting with each other and trying, the unrighteous wanting to seduce the righteous and the righteous want to convert the unrighteous. This began in the Vedic times. It is this thing that they were talking about. So instead of seeing this symbolic meaning, they come to the literal meaning. And after coming to the literal meaning, if you say, look, there is a symbolic meaning, then you become suddenly a Hindu revivalist. You suddenly become a Hindu revivalist because you don't agree with this kind of, these big pundits have said it, Oxford, they have a PhD from Oxford. I don't have a PhD from Oxford. I have a PhD from somewhere else. But that doesn't change the fact. There is a tradition in India where this Yama and Yami are supposed to be representing the Vedic language, the symbolic language. And Vedic seers were really bright-eyed, There is also a mantra where they recognize there is adharma. And so there is a tarpana given, adharmaya swaha. In which culture will you find this recognition? There is adharma also. And this adharma has to be transformed and changed. And it is this that is being talked about. And so we don't have the time to go to the Vedas. We don't have time to study the Sanskrit language. So we take the shortcut and read what they have written. And our own professors also do this and can get PhD and they become the Pandits and they are what is being broadcast from the All India Radio and TV stations, etc., etc. And if you say this is not right, you become a Hindu revivalist. And there are all kinds of things that is, Westerners had simply no way of understanding this culture. They came from a different culture. Whatever Kipling said, East and West, this is the ideal. It's not very easy. West has to do tapasya to understand the East. East has to do the tapasya to understand the West. It doesn't come just like that. And so there have been problems. They found it difficult to understand some of the things we are doing. And so because of our weakness is what? Our weakness is the popular mind, the educated mind has no understanding of Sanskrit tradition. Unless we do this, we will not understand our own history, we won't understand our own culture. We will be required to receive it at second, third, fourth hand. And if you are asked to judge who is right, you will not know who is right. Right now there is a controversy going on, as you know, ICHR. Who is right, who is wrong? You see, ultimately we have to reclaim our tradition. We have to know what this tradition is. I will give another example. This has escaped attention of most pundits. Many of us here are married people, right? And during the marriage ceremony, there is a mantra that is being recited. Most priests have forgotten what these mantras mean. Of course, we don't understand what the mantras mean. At one time, at least the priests understood what the mantras meant. I don't mean all priests. In Andhra Pradesh, we have priests who understand it. In Karnataka, we have priests who understand it. In Tamil Nadu, we have priests who understand what they are saying. But by and large, the priestly community doesn't know what the mantras mean. Now, there is a mantra, two mantras, which are recited everybody's marriage. It's a part of the marriage procedure. And I won't read the Sanskrit, the meaning of it is this: the bridegroom is asked to say, I am your fourth husband. Saying to the bride, I am your fourth husband. You've already been married thrice. He is supposed to say this to his wife as they go round this sacrificial fire. Say, you have said this, but since you don't know Sanskrit, you don't know what you said. But this is what you have said. Okay, and so the Pandits will say, look, in those days it was very common for women to marry as many husbands as they liked. Now, this is again ridiculous because what he is talking about, if you really understand the significance of it, what the priest wants you to realize is it is true, this girl is being handed over to you. Okay. But please remember, this girl, there are three stages through which this girl have already come through. One is infancy, the other is childhood, the third is girlhood. Now she is entering the fourth stage. Now, during the fourth stage, you are her protector. She had other protectors during the third stages. The first stage, she was protected as she was in her Shaishava, infancy, by Soma. Soma is not Somnath Chatterjee. Soma is the moon. The moon, and then when it comes to girl childhood, Gandharva. The Gandharva is the protector. Then comes the next stage, which is Kaumarya. Then Agni is the protector. So she has already had three protectors. The husband is being asked to remember, look, treat her in such a way that she also had a childhood. She was somebody's daughter. She was somebody's sister. She was somebody's granddaughter. They also have a claim on her. Then she was growing up. She had dreamt of great things. She had a right to have her own dreams. Don't squash them. The husband is being reminded of all these things. But instead of taking it in this way, suddenly we come to the conclusion in India it was quite common for girls to get married at a young age, and normally they fourth husband, fifth husband, sixth. This is the interpretation that of history, Indian history, that is going on in this country. It has gone on for a long time. We were at one time helpless. Now, of course, we have universities, we have printing presses, we are a free nation, a free country. If we don't understand ourselves, our own culture, who else will? So this came as a kind of, I'll read not the Sanskrit, but the English translation of the two Sanskrit verses, the part of the marriage ritual. It says, this woman was first acquired by Soma, next by the Gandharva, then by Agni, to whom she was presented. Her fourth husband, that is you, was born of a woman. So the human husband is the fourth. He becomes her protector during the fourth stage of her life. That's what it says is, she is not your property to treat as you like. She had a childhood, she had girlhood, she had all this early youth, her ambitions, her desires, other people's love for her. All these things are important. When you protect her, remember these things also. It's a kind of a trust that's being talked about, and not monogamy or polygamy or polyandry or whatever. This is the whole confusion. And that's why Sri Aurobindo insists that the Vedas, the language of the Vedas belongs to a totally different language. It's a symbolic language. Do not try. I don't blame Max Muller and company because that culture is different. They had made an honest attempt to understand us. They had problems. But we should be able to see what this is all about. No attempt is being made. And if any attempt is being made, you are put down. That's what has happened. And the same thing is happening about, Sri Aurobindo's interpretation of the Vedas. If you talk about it, they say, "Oh, this is all a cock and bull story. How is it possible that all these people didn't know this?" This kind of thing is going on. Well, this is incidental. Now, we are talking about death, and a lot has to be understood about death, because Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga seems to people associate that with the conquest of physical death in the terrestrial world, in this world. Now, most people probably would regard this as a most materialistic kind of ambition goal for yoga. After all, is this what yoga is all about? That you can continue to live forever and ever in the same body? I mean, it is true that at some stage, probably people joined the ashram because they thought by being in the ashram they will automatically become immortal. In other ashrams you get other things, but here you get immortality, insurance without a regular premium. So they all came. Then Sri Aurobindo left. Then the mother left. And so people were nonplussed, puzzled. The source of it is they didn't ever try to understand what Sri Aurobindo and the mother actually meant when they said, one of our goals is physical immortality. What exactly did they mean by that? Oh, many people have said to me, I've been coming here to Pondicherry for the last 45 years. I was a student when I first came here. Some people have been whispering to me in my ears, mother gave the impression that she was going to be immortal. And everybody trusted her. They didn't read the books, they didn't do anything because mother was here and she was going to be here forever and ever. But when Sri Aurobindo's Samadhi was being constructed, you know already that she had provided for another. You see, but she never talked about death, never sentimentalized it, because that should be our attitude. That we should never be contemplating on death, because most of us are so terrorized by death. Once your pension papers are proceeded, you already are nervous. And the mother says, we'll see later on what her attitude was. Exactly what does it mean to say we want physical immortality? Do you want to be in the same body? If God were to come to me and say, Professor Nadkarni or doctor or whoever you are, I am very pleased with the good work you have been doing for many years. I will make you like, one of these Puranic characters. We have quite a few Puranic characters. Vyasa, Hanuman, Ashwathama, they are all immortal. You will also be immortal in your body. I will say, oh Lord, don't punish me. Because an immortal body with an imperfect consciousness will be hell. Because already by about 95, 96, we become more or less vegetables. To be a vegetable for 4 or 5 years is all right, but forever and ever to be a vegetable, that's not what Sri Aurobindo and the mother meant. Totally a different interpretation, meaning they gave to this. And so, as a part of our unraveling of the significance of Yama, we'll try to see what exactly is mortality, what exactly is immortality, what exactly they meant by this. Now, the secret of death, as you know, has been the subject of probe for ages and ages. And I said in the morning that there are myths in all cultures of people who have defied death. In the Western culture, in Babylonian legends, we have examples of heroes who have defied death. And in our own Puranas, we have at least 7 characters who are supposed to be Chiranjeevis. Some of them are like Ashwathama is a Chiranjeevi. Vali is a Chiranjeevi. Vyasa is a Chiranjeevi. Hanuman, Vibhishan, Kripacharya, Parashurama. These are the 7 Pauranic characters who are supposed to be people still now refer to the having met Hanuman. I haven't come across anybody who has met Ashwathama. Better they don't meet him. Hanuman, I have seen met people or have heard about anecdote stories where they met Hanuman. Hanuman is still living. So all that I'm trying to say, I'm not, don't say, the so and so person in the society beach office said he had met Hanuman. I haven't met him. But I'm only saying there is a reference to stories, books, and so on of Hanuman. What I'm trying to say is that there is in all cultures, there is this kind of a feeling that death really is alien to us. And so we erect these hero figures who defied death. Then we have Satyavan, it's a part of our Indian myth, tradition. Savitri Satyavan is not just, doesn't just first come in Mahabharata. It's a Vedic myth. And Sri Aurobindo has taken the Vedic myth, and whatever is a Vedic myth, by the time it comes to the Puranas are like, in many ways, there's like Bollywood films. They put flesh and blood to it, make it look very attractive, etc., etc., and sometimes the original inspiration is lost. The original purity, the significance of the myth, the Vedic myth is lost by the time this whole thing comes to Purana. But because it has become a Purana, many people know about it. If you go back to the Vedic myth, you will find, again, Satyavan and Savitri, the original, the general impression is, this is a story which extols the virtues of wife's fidelity to the husband. So a wife has to be a pativrata. Husband doesn't have to be a patnivrata. That nobody talks about. This is a kind of thing, and my university friends, they're very learned people, they ask me very often, why is Sri Aurobindo in the 20th century once again repeating the old male chauvinistic story of wife had to do for her husband for a change? Why didn't he reverse the roles? You could have shown that Savitri died and Satyavan tried to save her. It could have been a reversal of roles, etc., etc. All these kinds of things are being said. So, this story of Savitri, as you know, primarily all Kathakars, they all, when they talk about women, they hold this ideal, shining, bright ideal of a wife who had this fidelity, and because of it, she got so much luster and strength and dynamism and tapasya that she conquered death, etc. But this is not the original inspiration of the Vedic myth. Sri Aurobindo, in a note appended to the newest edition of Savitri, talks about the original meaning of the myth. It comes right here. In the very first page of the new edition, what exactly the Vedic myth stands for. Now, if you read that, you will see it's a tremendous symbol that the Savitri Satyavan legend has. But by the time it comes to the Puranas, as I said, it has become one-sided. It has become the extolling the wifely qualities, etc., etc. This is what happens when things come to Purana. But there are these stories in the Puranas. Then we have also the example of Trishanku. You understand Trishanku? You have heard of him? Vishwamitra tried to send him directly in his body, but he was neither here nor there. He was kept hanging loose in the sky, Trishanku. Then the only person who seems to have gone to the other heaven is Yudhishthir. All the brothers fell by the wayside. Yudhishthir finally went along with the little dog. You know the story? I don't dare talk about Mahabharata anymore. Right? And if you are from Maharashtra, they know another person who went, Tukaram. Son Tukaram went on the gods themselves sent him an aeroplane and he went in a body. So what I'm trying to say is we have this racial memory that somehow death is alien to us. Although it's an ineluctable fact of life, it has been a part of life. Everybody who is born has died. And yet, there is something which says this may not be true for all time. We don't dare admit it. Our subtle physical, our sensational body, etc., have admitted it. They have accepted it because this is a habit. We have repeated years after years after year for several million years. But I will show you later on some biological evidence which suggests that death came much later during the evolutionary life. As it stands now, there is no evidence of any human being. There are evidence of people who have lived 130 years. They all live in Kazakhstan. We always have stories in Kazakhstan. Some lady who died at the age of 135. Newspaper walas, either because there is a slot they don't know how to fill, and they're quite sure nobody is going to go and inquire in Kazakhstan. Now, of course, everybody knows where Kazakhstan is. About 15, 20 years ago, nobody knew. Uzbekistan, oh, an elderly man died at the age of 140. He had 93 wives and 120 children. Provide such good material for coffee table, dining room table gossip. But by and large, 100 to 150 years, let us say, except in some cases, we still hear of great yogis who have defied death for 200-300 years. I have no means of either saying these are all just stories or legends, they are true or not. I tend to believe Sri Aurobindo himself once refers to a saint who lived more than 150 years. So it's quite possible that there are yogas, there are yogic kriyas which enable you to live beyond 150 years, but 100 to 150 years is the outside limit as it is. But as I said, the mother and Sri Aurobindo have taken up this. One of the goals of their yoga is the radical victory over the process of physical death. And that they think is possible here in terrestrial life. But the first point to note, and I will read quotations from Sri Aurobindo and the mother, that this seeking after physical immortality is in no way related to the finite being's blind and egoistic attachment to the body and bodily life, or his fearful shrinking from the mystery of death. There are two things. Mother has a beautiful essay called Four Ways of Conquering the Fear of Death. She says, before we die, the fear of death finishes us off. So she has a beautiful essay on 4 ways of conquering death. If you read it, you will find it's a wonderful essay. It gives you practical common sense, it gives you yogic insight and all that. But Sri Aurobindo says, as for immortality, it cannot come if there is attachment to the body. It cannot come as long as you are attached. It's very paradoxical. As long as you are attached to the body, you cannot be immortal. For it is only by living in the immortal part of oneself, which is unidentified with the body, and bringing down its consciousness and force into the cells, that it can come. There is a sense of immortality, there is a power of immortality accessible to man through the paths of yoga. And if you can acquire that force and bring it down into the cells of the body, then this miracle can happen. But that has nothing to do with our normal idea of continuing in the same body forever and ever. Every sadhak of the integral yoga must eschew all attachment to life in the body and renounce the repulsion of the death of the body. This is from Synthesis of Yoga, which is so strong and vehement an instinct of the vital man. It must be thrown away entirely. The fear of death and the aversion to bodily cessation are the stigma left by an animal origin on the human being. That brand must be utterly effaced. So the first thing is this egoistic attachment to the body and bodily life, and the fear of death, the terrorization of death, you must be free from both these. Mother has categorically said that he who fears death has already been conquered by death. He who fears death has already been conquered by death, and one can conquer only that which one does not fear. You can conquer death only if you do not fear death. She has attributed several reasons for this fear of death: the spirit of conservation, the concern for self preservation so as to ensure continuity of consciousness, the recoil before the unknown, the unease caused by the unexpected, incalculable, and perhaps behind all that, hidden in the depth of the selves, the instinct that death is not an inescapable thing. They keep harboring this, that death is not an inescapable thing, and this must go down, this message must go down to the cells. If we begin to see this and feel this, maybe after 500 years, 600 years from now, this feeling may be a part of the human makeup. Now, as soon as you are 55, 56, if you're slightly limping, what happened? Arthritis, is it? No, sir. I'm slightly limping because something has slipped and fell and something happened. Your heart all right? Fine, sir. My heart is fine. Everybody is sending you the negative suggestions. This is what we are. We have impregnated our consciousness with vibrations of death. And on the other hand, we want to be immortal. How is it possible? The first thing is, this is what the mother meant. This is why she hated to talk about death. This is why even she knew somebody was going to pop up in 2 days, she never talked about death. She only talked about living and growing and all this, because we are here to live and to grow. Death may be just an interlude that takes you away and brings you back, and again you continue to grow. Why talk about that interlude? That's what her attitude must have been. And so this people have mistaken, and they whisper into my ears, Mother gave the impression she was going to be here forever and ever, but she just left. How stupid can we be? This is the story that's going on. So he says, there are two questions which are important. What is the meaning and content of immortality? What exactly do we mean by immortality? Soul immortality. What evidence or proof do we have to suppose that a soul entity is distinct from and independent of our body? First of all, I want a proof that we have a soul. Second, I want to find out that soul is immortal. If you give me two things, then I'll prepare to proceed. Of course, now we are talking of the year 2001. Sri Aurobindo confronted these questions in his writings in the heyday of materialism in 1914 and 15, when the Life Divine was being written. And in one of his books, there is a book called The Problem of Rebirth. There he talks about it. What is the proof that you are immortal? What is the proof that honey is sweet? There is proof. Leave some honey on your table, ants will come. What is the proof that it is the sweetness of the honey that drew the ants? This is how the human mind goes on, all kinds of questions. Do you mean to say that ants like only sweet things, they don't like other things? This kind of question goes on. So Sri Aurobindo has a neat answer. He says, the soul needs no proof of its rebirth any more than it needs proof of its immortality. The soul needs no proof. If you want the proof of immortality, if you want to feel that you are immortal, then you can't do it on something that is as limited as the mind. You want to stick to the mind and you want to understand how man is immortal. You read all the books in the world and you will never get any proof. But the experience of immortality, you see, you want to see whether the sun is shining or not, all that you do is go and stand out in the open. The sun is pouring down, and every pore of your body is feeling the heat and the light. You don't ask a scientist, is there a sun, sir? What is this happening to me? You don't need a proof. So, similarly, the fact that you are immortal, the fact that you have no death, is so patent to experience at the level of the soul. He says the soul needs no proof of its birth any more than it needs proof of its immortality. For there comes a time when it is consciously immortal, aware of itself in its eternal